Have you actually started recording?
I just did. Okay,
There it
so
is.
yeah. So the recording has started, and I'm sharing my screen. So welcome to this meeting of the class on traditional Buddhist chanting. Tonight we'll be talking about the Heart Sutra and in particular the Heart Sutra Mantra. And so to start the class, we will recite the Heart Sutra together, and that will also be how we will end the class. So let me mute myself. Are you hearing the chant? Is it? You're not. Okay. Glad I asked. Let me see. Let me stop share. And yeah, that's it. Let me just do a test here. Okay, good. Okay. So on this slide, everybody can hear me, right? Yeah, okay. So on this slide, which is the first slide for this presentation, it's titled the Great Bright Mantra, which is one of the ways of referring to the Heart Sutra Mantra. I'm also referring to it as the heart of the Heart Sutra. And let me go into slideshow mode just so I can get that way I can have a nice laser pointer. All right. Now I can get my laser pointer. All right. The heart of the Heart Sutra. So these are some questions that one could ask about the Heart Sutra. What is it? The Heart Sutra Mantra. What is this Heart Sutra Mantra? What kind of a mantra is it? So this question implies another question. Are there different kinds of mantras? Are all mantras the same? What does mantra actually mean? Is the Heart Sutra Mantra really a mantra? Sometimes people will come along and say, oh, that's not a mantra. This is not a mantra, whatever, and so I'll do that sometimes, but I try not to, because it doesn't matter. If somebody's doing something as a practice, you should never tell them that they're doing it wrong, in my opinion, or for the most part. And we're going to actually talk about that a little bit. But anyway, these are some of the questions or kinds of questions that one could ask about the Heart Sutra Mantra. Do any of you have any answers to these questions, or other questions that you would like to raise, or other kinds of doubts or issues or anything about the Heart Sutra that you want to talk about?
I was just curious why that is one of the only sutras that we chant in English usually.
In English, right? Okay.
Like a lot of the other sutras, like, or I guess the other, maybe not sutras, a lot of the other chants that we do are usually not in English. So I was just curious if there was reason.
So I don't know the answer as to why, but I know that Zen Master Sung San, well, that could be given as the answer. Zen Master Sung San, that's why. But so what he did, he traveled all over the world. He taught people in Lithuania. He taught people in Israel. He taught people in South America, in Malaysia, Australia, where they more or less speak English, but it's very different. Anyway, but what he did, whether it's Spain or Germany or Lithuania or wherever, he encouraged his students to come up with a translation. And of course, in many languages, there are already translations of the Heart Sutra, but generally he used he used his own or his students' own translations into their own native language. And so it isn't just that we do chant the Heart Sutra in English. We chant the Heart Sutra twice. And so, and it's worth chanting twice, I think. And so we chant it once and this is true for all of Zen Master Sung San's students and grand students, his Dharma family throughout the world. He taught them all to chant it in their own native language, and then to also chant it the way he learned it and the way he could give it to people, which is the original, basically, the way that Xuanzang wrote it 1400 years ago, which of course is still pronounced differently by different people depending upon whether they're Korean or Japanese, or whether they speak Mandarin or Cantonese or whatever dialect of Chinese. So that's the history of it. And I think people were, the Heart Sutra had been known by people in the West or people outside of Asia for quite some time. They were already familiar with translations of it. And so I think, I think he wanted to give people the opportunity to because it is interesting to look at. But if you look at it and you begin to wonder, what does this mean? You really have to then go back to either the Chinese or the Sanskrit or the Tibetan or whatever. Anyway, I don't know. Joe, you were going to ask a question too, I think. You're nodding, Camille, so I assume that kind of answers your question. Okay, good. Thank you for that question. Joe, were you going to ask something?
Well, not specifically. I think I was formulating some possible questions, but I'm a little intrigued just by the questions that you put up here. I've never really asked those questions myself.
Okay.
What is I mean, we sort of know what a mantra is just by what we've been doing with them by chanting them.
Right.
But the fact that there might be different kinds of mantras, that's interesting. And also the question is the Heart Sutra mantra really a mantra? So hopefully don't disqualify it for me, but but all very intriguing questions.
Uh-huh. Okay. Well, I don't know if we'll really answer these questions. They're good. It's good to ask questions like this. It's good to look at different kinds of answers. But now let's. I want to look at the mantra, and not just the mantra itself, but the mantra is part of the end of the Heart Sutra is kind of interesting. There's a. In fact, I can go back to. Oh, and I do want to go back. All right. So this is a slide from the previous class where we talked about. Actually, we talked about is the Heart Sutra a sutra? That was one of the themes of the last class. But this is the breakdown of the different sections of the Heart Sutra. You've got the title, then you've got this introductory section, and then you've got what people have come to call the core of the Heart Sutra, which starts from Shariputra, form does not differ from emptiness, emptiness does not differ from form. So this core is notable mostly for negations. It's mostly know this, not that, know this, not that, without this, without that. No suffering, no origination, no stopping, no path, no cognition, also no attainment, and with nothing to attain. Okay, so the core stops there. Then all of a sudden, this is the conclusion of the Heart Sutra, and this is all of a sudden much more positive. The Bodhisattva depends on prajnaparamita, and the mind is no hindrance. Now we have a no, but it's like the mind is no hindrance. The mind is free. So I do want to make one little detour here, and I couldn't remember Dongshan's name in the last class. Dongshan was a very famous Zen master, the founder of what is known in Japan as the Soto School of Zen, and his biography begins with him as a child, being when he was first taught the Heart Sutra. He said, "Huh, I have eyes, ears, nose, tongue. Why does the sutra say they don't exist?" So that's a good question. Okay, but now. To talk about the Heart Sutra mantra, I think you have to see it as part of this concluding part of the Heart Sutra, that it suddenly changes from negations and moo 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 to a much more positive, which was also true at the very beginning of the Heart Sutra. It says that when Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva perceived that all five skandhas are empty, that Avalokiteshvara was thereby saved from all suffering and distress. Then at the end it says the Bodhisattva depends on prajnaparamita, and the mind is no hindrance. Without any hindrance, no fears exist, far apart from every deluded. Actually, this I should have changed this. Perverted view. One dwells in nirvana. In the three worlds, all Buddhists depend on prajnaparamita and attain anuttara samyak-sambodhi. Therefore, know that prajnaparamita is the great transcendent mantra, is the great bright mantra, is the utmost mantra, is the supreme mantra, which is able to relieve all suffering and is true, not false. So proclaim the prajnaparamita mantra, proclaim the mantra which says. So this is a lot of buildup, to get to the mantra. So you can see this final part of the Heart Sutra is often called the conclusion, but in a lot of ways it's the build-up to the mantra itself. Ajay Ajay Bara Sung Ajay Moji Sabaha. And so here's some different ways of writing the mantra, and you may have seen the slide before in other classes or something like this. This is writing it in Devanagari, which is the way, which is the most accurate way of writing Sanskrit. Well, it's the most accurate way that is readily available. You can also write Sanskrit in Siddham script, which is much more genuinely esoteric. Let's see. This is writing the Sanskrit mantra out using transliteration with diacritical marks. This is how it's written in Chinese characters. This is how Xuanzang wrote it when he wrote the Heart Sutra. This is how he wrote the mantra at the end of the Heart Sutra. This is how it's pronounced by Japanese speakers: gate, gate, hara, gate, haraso, gate, boji, sowaka. So sabaha becomes sowaka when Japanese Buddhists pronounce it for some reason. Or svaha, the original svaha. Okay, and then this is the Korean pronunciation: aje, aje, bara, sung, aje, moji, sabaha. And this is the Korean written using Hangul. And so Hangul is a little important. So sometimes this syllable is often written S-U-N-G, but if you know Hangul and you see it written in Hangul, then you can see this line here means that it's not you, it's EU. It's sung. It's more. It's not sung. It's sung. Not that my Korean pronunciation is any good. Okay, so this is getting more to questions about mantras. All right. Anyone have any questions about? So what I've covered now is just what the mantra is. And we all know it because we can recite it. We recite it. I think all of us know it both in or are accustomed to reciting it in the Korean pronunciation, and then also in the kind of the English pronunciation, the Sanskrit pronunciation. Gate, gate, parasam, gate, bodhisvaha. Any questions so far? Any? Yeah, Joe, go ahead.
As you were speaking, this sort of popped into my head. And as we sort of build up to the finale and when we get to the mantra, it's interesting just because normally when you're chanting this, especially at a Zen center, you're chanting it and you get to the point and you get done with it, right? But question about the longer, larger Prajna Paramita sutras, and that the core is perhaps taken from those and inserted into this version. Is the mantra within those larger sutras or not? And where did it come from?
Yeah. So so where did this mantra come from? So it does. So this this is it's a Sanskrit mantra that has its own existence outside of the Heart Sutra. And so the construction process of putting together the Heart Sutra as we know it involves and I can go back to the slide again. Actually, all of these different parts were kind of put together. So the title of the Heart Sutra is a whole separate subject. This title, which actually, so this is the Sanskrit title, but actually the Chinese title that Xuanzang gave to it, no one had ever called it that before. In fact, no one had ever called it, so no one had ever called it the Mahabanya Bharam, the Mahaprajna Paramita Hridaya Sutra before. And in fact, it was often called a Dharani previously. So you have this title and this introduction. So where each of these parts come from In fact, so not only the mantra, but all of these things that are said in here about the praise, the direct praise of the mantra itself. Therefore, know that Prasaparamita is the great transcendent mantra, the great bright mantra, the utmost mantra, the supreme mantra. And if you go looking through Chinese and Sanskrit Mahayana Buddhist texts, you could find these words. So these were kind of lifted from other places. And this mantra itself is found in a couple of different places, none of which are particularly none of which are familiar to me. Buddhist scholars can look at that and say, oh, this is in, this or that text. But I think the important thing is that this mantra exists on its own, and you can actually think of this this whole construction, and this is actually going to be the final slide if we get that far tonight. This is like the payload, and the rest of this is a way of kind of building up and creating a space in which to practice this mantra. And the mantra itself then is often interpreted as referring back to and summarizing, condensing everything that's in the Heart Sutra up to that point. And of course, the Heart Sutra is considered to be itself a condensation of Mahayana Buddhist teachings. But yeah, so the answer is go read Jan Nattier's 1992 paper on the Heart Sutra if you want to know what the other Sanskrit sources are that contain this mantra.
Okay, sure. And Kurt, one last question.
Yeah.
For example, when we looked at the Jijang Bosal chanting, those mantras had specific requests attached to them to eliminate fixed karma and so on. Does this mantra have any direct purpose? To do something?
So so one of the things about each of those mantras that you're referring to in the Jijang Bosal chant and the Kwanzaa Bosal chant, so they have a title.
Yes.
So like, for example, this is Jijang's Dharani for the elimination of difficult karma, or this is the Dharani spoken by the Buddha to save us from calamities and to bring good fortune. So it's like explicitly stated in the title, and that's kind of what the I'm going to go back again to.
Sorry.
That's all right. Starting from here, that's what this part is. Therefore, know that Prasaparamita is the great transcendent mantra, is the great by mantra, is the Atma mantra, is the supreme mantra, which is able to relieve all suffering and is true, not false. So proclaim the Prasaparamita mantra, proclaim the mantra which says. So the one other thing that the mantra is being referred to as the Prasaparamita mantra now, right? And Prasaparamita can be understood. Prasaparamita is actually imagined as a great bodhisattva, as a female bodhisattva who is the original mother of all the Buddhas. Now, Prasaparamita was early on praised and referred to as the mother of all the Buddhas, because Prasaparamita is wisdom itself, is where Buddhas come from, the source of Buddhas. And one thing that happened is that after that, many other female bodhisattvas also came to be called the mother of all the Buddhas. But Prasaparamita was the original mother of all the Buddhas. And in fact, Red Pine, in his book on the Heart Sutra, he speculates that if Prasaparamita is the mother of all the Buddhas, then Prasaparamita can also be thought of as Mahamegha, Maya Devi, the literal physical mother of Shakyamuni Buddha. Although I think he's the only person who's ever come to that conclusion, but it's an interesting idea. Let's see. Go ahead, Camille.
So kind of on the fourth part of the slide, we were talking about japa, meaning water. So is that like still in relation to, like, I've definitely heard like kind of meditation beads like called like a japa mala. Is that like, is that essentially what that's referring to? Like that you're basically, I guess I don't know what mala means, but to say that you're just kind of like, I don't know, uttering a mantra over and over.
Okay, so ask it again. I didn't hear all of it. If for some reason the sound wasn't good.
Oh, sorry. I was just curious if like that's kind of like what mala is referring to. If you're talking about a japa mala, like that it's like basically that you're like repeating a mantra. That was kind of the question.
Right. So the word actually I don't know what mala means. I think it means, well, I mean, I know what it I know what a mala is, but I don't know what the literal Sanskrit means. But I do know that the japa in Sanskrit, I was just looking at this today, literally means mutter. So which is a description of what people are doing. If you see someone doing mantra practice, they're muttering, they're sitting there, you know, and so that's what japa means. And so japa is a really great term because people get hung up on what's a mantra, what's a dharani, does it, you know, so some people have gone so far as to say, oh, like the Heart Sutra mantra really needs to have an om on the beginning of it. Then it'll be a proper mantra. You know, but and then but one thing you know is if you see somebody repeating something over and over again, they're doing japa. And some people will say, some people then get into whether or not it's a proper mantra or not. But if you repeat something over and over again as some sort of practice, that's called japa. But I don't. So that doesn't really answer your question. But do you want to ask more? Okay. All right. So this slide just talks about. Oh yeah. Well, so one interesting thing about mantras is that mantras are not Buddhist. Mantras are, you know, older than Buddhism, and they're not particular or specific or distinctive of Buddhism. There are Jain mantras, Sikh mantras, mantras for every different variety of Hinduism, and throughout the history of Buddhism, there's always been some sort of mantra-like practice, going back to things that were taught by the Buddha himself. But a lot of Buddhists have tried to avoid using the word mantra just because other people use mantra and they want to say, oh no, our practice is different. Or at least that this is my interpretation, not mine alone. So like in Theravada Buddhism, Parita chanting is very common. It's one of the core practices of Theravada Buddhism. And what is Parita chanting? It's repeating things over and over again for protection and blessings. That's the, you know, that's what any good Theravada Buddhist will tell you is the reason for doing Parita chanting is for protection and blessings. And the things that are being chanted are the words of the Buddha, things that the Buddha taught, whether it's it's a very short Parita chant that the Buddha taught to Angulimala that is used for protection of women during childbirth. There's a Parita chant for protection from snakes. There's one for protection from fire. There's a lot of them that are just for general good luck and for, you know, avoiding misfortune. There's the Metta Sutta, which is a Parita chant, which is the loving kindness chant. There's the Ratana Sutta, which is kind of the Pali version, roughly speaking, the Pali version of the Homage to the Three Jewels, which is also considered to be a Parita chant, which that chant can protect you from pandemics, so it's very popular recently. It can also protect you from famine and from flesh-eating zombies. It has the power to protect from flesh-eating zombies as well. The Ratana Sutta is very multi-purpose. And in Sanskrit, there is also the word japa, which literally means something like mutter. In practice, it is used to refer to repeating something like a mantra over and over. It often implies that one is keeping count. And this is another thing. Many times when people do mantra practice, they're keeping count. So when we had the video of the Heart Sutra up there, when we got to the mantra, it said 3 times. When we do the Heart Sutra, as a general rule, you recite the mantra 3 times at the end. You can do it more than that. I don't think anybody ever does it less than 3 times. And one could ask, why is that? I don't know. Unlike mantra, the Sanskrit word Dharani is only found in Mahayana Buddhism. So in Theravada Buddhism, what look to other people to be things like mantras are called parita chants in Theravada Buddhism. In Mahayana Buddhism, a lot of the things that look like mantras are called Dharanis. And there are all kinds of different definitions of Dharanis, but for the most part, in practice, there are some very interesting technical definitions of what Dharani means, but in the practice, it just means mantra or long mantra. And the whole Heart Sutra, prior to Xuanzang, the versions of the Heart Sutra that existed prior to Xuanzang were generally referred to as Dharanis. So the entire Heart Sutra itself can be thought of as a mantra or a Dharani. All right. So this is just kind of going back to the point that I was making before. Buddhists can be a little overly concerned about differentiating Buddhism from other paths. I think this is just a list of things that Buddhists have that are not unique to Buddhism. Meditation, for example. So sometimes people will say, oh, and there are actually people who will claim, oh, the Buddha taught us not to do mantras, shouldn't do mantras. That's not really true. The Buddha taught not to do certain types of, or not to be overly concerned with certain types of Vedic practices. Anyway, meditation itself is something that existed long before the Buddha came along. The Buddha studied meditation as part of his path before he attained enlightenment. The sutras, Jains and Sikhs and Hindus have sutras, stupas, malas, mandalas, mudras, rebirth, karma, dharma, Tao. So when Buddhism comes to China, Buddhism gets Tao. So when we talk about the Buddha way, it's the Buddha Tao. Monasticism, Sanskrit, and of course Om. There's many different ways to write Om. This is the way that Om is written in the Tamil script. I think it's my personal favorite way of writing Om. Lots of people have Om. Lots of people have all of these things, and that's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing that Buddhism, is actually a continuation of, in many ways, spiritual practices that were already thousands of years old. This is one of the great things about doing Buddhist practices. We are connecting with traditions that were already ancient, even in the time of the Buddha. Okay, speaking of which, so here's kind of a good example, a very good example of a Hindu mantra, the Gayatri mantra, Om Bhur Bhuvasuvaha Tat Savitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Na Prachodayat, which is also the theme song to the Battlestar Galactica TV series. Although the version that they use is very strange. The music for it is difficult to recognize if you're used to chanting the Gayatri mantra. But anyway, the reason why I wanted to put this up is that it's sometimes people say nobody understands what mantras are, or they're just sounds, they're meaningless sounds, and that certainly isn't true. Sometimes over time the meaning has been forgotten. So this is at the same time, though, even though mantras or Dharanis are generally not meaningless, a lot of times when you find people who will say, oh, this is what it means, they're just making things up. Or they're just using the mantra to, and so Om means Para Brahman, the entire universe. Well, that seems about right. Bur, physical space. So all these, so these are not, this is from Wikipedia, so I don't feel any need to defend or revere this particular interpretation of the Gayatri Mantra. But really, this all looks pretty good. But I wouldn't take Wikipedia's word for it. And if you go, you can find many books on the Gayatri Mantra. I practiced for a while with the Hindu guru who she had her own TV show in India. She probably still does, and she spent 6 months going through the Gayatri Mantra one syllable at a time. Every week she would do. Well, I think she would sometimes spend more than a week on a given syllable, but they do have meaning. But when someone comes along and says, "Oh, here's the meaning," listen, but don't necessarily trust but verify. Yeah. And so, so next up is to look at the Dalai Lama's explanation of the Heart Sutra Mantra. But before that, I want to take a 5-minute break. So that's what's coming up, and I'm going to, here we go. I'm going to put up the timer so that we can take a 5-minute break. Oh, yeah. I think I'm still sharing my screen, right? You can see my screen. Good. All right. Now, it's interesting to look at the way different people have analyzed and presented their own thinking on what does the Heart Sutra Mantra mean. And one of the things that you'll find is that generally, even very respected, well-known, famous, whatever, good teachers, if you ask two of them, you'll get three different answers as to what does the Heart Sutra Mantra mean. Which means that it means that they are, analyzing it according to their understanding. But that what it does mean is that there isn't some like traditional accepted analysis of what the Heart Sutra means. Although you could say, well, there are the people who agree with the Dalai. I'm going to go through the Dalai Lama's analysis, which is quite interesting, and then compare it to another analysis by Kukai, also known as Kobo Daishi, who is the founder of the Shingon school in Japan, which is interesting. Shingon is, of course, not of course, but you might know is the Shingon is a Japanese pronunciation of the Chinese word for mantra. So the Shingon school in Japan is the mantra school, which it raises another issue that is associated with mantras, which is that a lot of times people associate mantras with either magic or with esoteric or tantric Buddhism. And speaking of tantric Buddhism, let's start looking at this explanation of the Heart Sutra according to the Dalai Lama, the world's most famous tantric Buddhist. So he says, when you get to the mantra up to this point, the Heart Sutra is said to be an explanation of emptiness for trainees who are of unexceptional aptitude. So I'm always glad when I encounter that, because I think, good, that's what I want. I don't want the stuff that's for, advanced people. I want the stuff that's easier to understand. But then the text makes a concise presentation in the form of a mantra of emptiness, which is aimed at people of the highest aptitude. And so this is interesting. Often mantra practice or Dharanis are sometimes thought of as practices for people or more advanced practices. Okay, that's actually not really true. It can be, but for the most part, one of the reasons that mantras and Dharanis, the practice of mantras and Dharanis is so widespread in Buddhism is because lay people like mantras and Dharanis. Lay people generally do not necessarily have the time or the resources or the ability to spend hours and hours and hours every day sitting silently. And often serious practice of silent sitting meditation is often considered only appropriate for monastics. Even though people sometimes say that, lay people have always practiced silent sitting meditation, but lay people really love, as a general rule in Asia, lay Buddhists, who are the vast majority of people who practice Buddhism, they like mantras and Dharanis. Give me some mantras. Give me one of the reasons for that is because mantras are often say, oh, this is a mantra that will protect you from snakes. This is a mantra that will, protect you from fire. That sounds good. Okay, anyway. So, but here the Dalai Lama is approaching the Heart Sutra Mantra in particular as a more advanced practice. And you kind of get that, and that is not completely unreasonable. The way that the mantra is built up at the end of the Heart Sutra, it does sound like something pretty special. The Great Bright Mantra, the the utmost mantra. Anyway, so the mantra contains the implicit or hidden meaning of the Heart Sutra, revealing how understanding of emptiness is related to the 5 stages of the path to Buddhahood. And so, and the rest of this explanation that the Dalai Lama gives is dependent upon this idea of the 5 stages of the path to Buddhahood. So, who here is familiar with the 5 stages of the path to Buddhahood? It's a bit of a rhetorical question. I wouldn't expect anyone, unless you have studied Tibetan Buddhism, and it isn't even just Tibetan Buddhism. The idea of first of all, there's 2 parts to this phrase: the 5 stages and the path to Buddhahood. So, yeah, this isn't really a tantric or a Tibetan Buddhist idea. This is a Mahayana Buddhist idea, but it is one of the Mahayana Buddhist ideas that you're unlikely to encounter if you're mostly familiar with Zen Buddhism as it's taught in the West. It's something that just doesn't get brought up. It's actually the idea of these stages of the path to Buddhahood is a very central idea in Theravada Buddhism. So it isn't even a Mahayana Buddhist idea, but it's a big deal in Tibetan. It's a big deal in the way that Tibetan Buddhists teach Mahayana Buddhism. And so, so then he breaks it down. The first go, that is the first gate, right, is refers to the path of accumulating merit. Okay. Now, accumulating merit is not is an idea that is pretty common among Buddhists. A merit means what is merit? So merit is not exactly the same thing as good karma. Merit really means karma that is well, it means the best kind of karma that helps you on the path to Buddhahood, karma that helps you on your in your practice as a bodhisattva. The second gate, so there's gate, the second gate is the path to preparing the mind to deeply perceive emptiness. Okay. So the first one is just, accumulating merit is considered kind of a very preliminary step that anyone could do. Right. The second part, the path to preparing the mind to deeply perceive emptiness, sounds a little more advanced. Go beyond, that's the paragate, okay? That refers to the path of seeing reality, the direct and unmediated realization of emptiness. So gate, paragate means kind of getting ready, getting closer. And this is actually very similar to the first 3 ox herding pictures, which is looking for the ox, finding the traces of the ox, and then actually seeing the ox. Maybe I'll write a book on that someday, on how the Heart Sutra Mantra can be understood in terms of the ox herding pictures. Anyway, a practitioner who sees in this way has become an Arya, or a noble being. Now, so already this is pretty. So this means, and I'll talk a little bit more about what this means in a slide that's coming up. But there are different kinds of bodhisattvas. There's you and me. And then there's Jijang Bosal and Avalokitesvara and people like that. And they are much more advanced bodhisattvas. So they are further along. They are much more able to directly and unmediately see true reality. Anyway, practitioner who sees in this way has become an Arya, or a noble being. So this is Parasamgate, go totally beyond, indicates the path of meditation, wherein one becomes deeply familiar with emptiness through constant practice. So that means not just being able to see meditation. In some ways, this is like the 4th and the 5th ox herding pictures, which are getting hold of the ox and taming the ox, going beyond just seeing the ox, but coming into direct contact with the ox, getting hold of it, and actually taming it. The final part of the mantra, Bodhisattva, is an exhortation to establish oneself firmly in the ground of enlightenment, which is also kind of like, establishing oneself firmly in the ground of enlightenment which is kind of like going from the fourth and fifth ox herding picture, which is getting hold of the ox and taming the ox, up to the sixth ox herding picture, which is riding the ox home. So once you're able to, by this, so actually the fifth ox herding picture is quite violent. It has, if you actually read the traditional poems that are associated with the ox herding pictures, it says that you must not allow your whip to leave the body of the ox for even a moment. And then in the sixth ox herding picture, you and the ox are now friends, which is where the state that you really want to be at. And this is where you have established oneself. You establish yourself firmly in the ground of enlightenment, final nirvana. Okay, so I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because, so it's interesting to read things from both the Tibetan, in my opinion, as a Zen student, it is interesting to read things from either from a Tibetan Buddhist perspective or from a Theravada Buddhist perspective, because they will explain things, which is not always done in Zen. This is kind of breaking things down a little bit more than what is considered to be good form in Zen. Anyway, let's see. He talks a lot about the this is a little interesting here. The actual transition from one stage to the next takes place when the practitioner is immersed in meditative equipoise. What does this mean? So you have to understand the Dalai Lama's he comes from a very, very, very intellectual tradition. The Gelugpa sect of Tibetan Buddhism. They're very analytical, very kind of wordy, very meticulous, and this is the way they talk when they're getting into their Gelugpa mode. But it can be kind of interesting to look at. But I'm going to skip ahead. Oh yeah, here we go. So this is kind of breaking it down a little bit, what he's talking about. I know that this is might be a little hard to see a lot of this, but oh yeah. Well, one of the interesting things here is we can, I'm going to, yeah, okay, this is good. All right. So the bhumis are, the bhumis are the stages of the path to Buddhahood. And there's 10 of them. And one of the things that you should know is that in order to be even on the first stage is you're already a very advanced bodhisattva. So all this stuff that the Dalai Lama is talking about in terms of the cultivating the 5 powers, 4 bases, 5 strengths, all this stuff. This is kind of the key phrase over here. Bodhisattvas who are still ordinary beings. And it's good to have practices, and in fact, all of our practices, whether it's Zen Buddhism or any other form of Buddhism, all of our practices are practices that are intended to help us to become enlightened Buddhas. So there's always this very advanced aspect of any practice that we do, whether it's just sitting meditation or chanting or reciting a mantra. But it's good to know that within that scheme, there is a place for us, ordinary beings. So it's there. It's at the beginning, but we're included. All right. Okay, now this is Kukai. I don't know, anybody here know Kukai? He's a big deal in Japanese Buddhism. He wrote. I don't have a link to it here, but I'll include a link on it when I put this up on YouTube. So Kukai gives a little bit better explanation of the, or a little bit easier to understand if you're not familiar with this 5 stages path. He says the first gate is for Shravakas, right? Shravakas, the hearers. Shravakas are people who seek people who are not Mahayana Buddhists, but they're Buddhists and they seek individual enlightenment. The second gate is for the Prateka Buddha path. Prateka Buddhas are, I don't really understand. Anybody here understand Prateka Buddhas? So Prateka Buddhas are like, if you've ever taken a class from someone who knew what they were talking about, wasn't very good but wasn't very good at teaching it. That's kind of what a Prateka Buddha is. And sometimes I feel like that in these classes, but I kind of know what I'm talking about, but I'm not sure if I'm getting anything across. Prateka Buddhas, mathematicians are often Prateka Buddhas, because they, it's difficult to teach math. It's difficult to understand math, and a lot of times the people who do understand it. So Prateka Buddha is someone who mostly attains enlightenment on their own, and mostly isn't concerned with teaching others. And Mahayana, so Paragate, Paragate is and these are considered the three vehicles in some schemas. Prateka Buddhayana, Mahayana. Paragate is Mahayana. Parasamgate. So Parasamgate now gets into what Kukai would consider to be, esoteric Buddhism or interesting Buddhism or, magic Buddhism or Buddhism where you have extra tools like mantras and mandalas. And this is one of the problems with the way a lot of people approach mantras and mandalas, is that esoteric Buddhists often say that, you can't practice mantras unless you have special permission or special teaching. And that's not true. That might be true for some particular mantras or for some particular ways of practicing mantras, but or mandalas. But you can go buy mandala coloring books, and you can buy books full of mantras, or just go and watch YouTube videos of mantras all day long. And of course, I think everybody agrees that Bodhi-Svaha, the end of the mantra, refers to ultimate enlightenment realization. Okay, so let's see. How are we doing on time? Oh, good. Got enough time. This is, I want to check back in to see if anybody has questions or commentary or Camille.
Like another translation that I've heard of this is like gone, all the way gone to the other shore. And I was just curious if you think, I guess part of the function of mantras now, maybe not everywhere, but like in the West, is becoming almost like koan practice, where like you kind of sit with it and learn what it, like what's like that's your understanding of it. Does that make sense? Like you're sort of coming to your own realization about it? Do you think that's sort of become the function of them, or no?
Well, so I read Kukai. He wrote an interesting. It's not that long, but it's his explanation of the entire Heart Sutra, including his explanation of the Heart Sutra Mantra. And so this is a guy who is a very closely associated with esoteric Buddhism, Mantrayana, Vajrayana in its Japanese kind of version. And he says in his little essay that he wrote on the Heart Sutra, he says that his understanding of the Heart Sutra comes from practicing the Heart Sutra mantra. Right? So that's what you're talking about. That you and really all the stuff that people say or that I said about mantras or whatever, mantras are practices to do. And say, to do what? Well, that's what we have to bring to the practice. What are you looking for? What do you which is the same thing with the koan. What is this koan for? Well, what are you looking for? I mean, why do you anyway, that is addressed by the story that I'm now going to tell. This is actually a letter that was written to Zen Master Sung San, and then his reply. So This is from and here's a link to it right up here. If you click on this, it'll take you right to it. Now, from 1977, this is back in the day. Okay. Dear Sunsanim, how are you? I hope you are well. Even though you are working so hard, everyone at Cambridge Zen Center says hello to you and our West Coast family. I must tell you something. This summer, I came to believe in Buddhism 100%, so I am very happy. Before, there was a lot of fighting in my mind about whether or not to practice, but this summer, a lot of bad karma disappeared. This fighting stopped, so practicing became possible. Also, I was able to quit smoking, something I thought I'd never be able to do in a million years. How did this happen? Do you remember 2 years ago when a lot of bad karma appeared in my mind and I moved out of the Zen Center and stopped practicing? Then you gave me the mantra, Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhisvaha. Within 3 months, I was back at the Zen Center practicing. And then you said, okay, your mind is stronger. So now you must breathe in, clear mind, and breathe out, don't know. I've got to stop and make a commentary here right now. I don't know have anybody here ever done this breathe in, clear mind, breathe out, don't know practice? Yeah, so this is, for some reason, Zen Master Sung San thought this was a very good idea. This is a kind of mantra practice that is very common among a lot of the teachers who trained under Zen Master Sung San. As far as I know, Zen Master Daegak has never gone anywhere near this, and I'm glad of that. I'm not a big fan of this particular kind of practice, but who am I to say? You should never criticize anybody else's practice, even though I just kind of did. Okay, so then Zen Master Sung San told him, okay, now that your mind is stronger, you should just breathe in, clear mind, and breathe out, don't know. So he goes on to say, I did this practice for a while, even though I did not like it. But at the beginning of the summer, my bad old karma appeared again. I hate Zen. I don't want to practice. So I started doing the mantra again. And again, this bad karma disappeared. Now I don't understand mantras. All I know is that when I begin to lose my direction, this mantra, Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhisvaha, this mantra sets me straight. Is it okay to do it all the time, even when my mind is strong? Some people say that using a mantra is very low-class practice. Is this true? Please tell me about using a mantra. Thank you for teaching me about Buddhism. Love, Dion. Okay, this is a great letter. This really hits to a lot of important stuff, including what to do when your teacher tells you to do something but you don't like it. All right. So Zen Master Sung San writes back and says, thank you for your letter. How are you? The West Coast family says hello to you, the Cambridge Zen Center. You say you believe in Buddhism 100%. I'm glad to hear that. Congratulations on your practice becoming very strong. You also said you stopped smoking. That is wonderful. In your letter, you wrote about mantra and don't know mine. Some people say using a mantra is low class. This is wrong. It is their thinking that is low class. The Compass of Zen says, so the Compass of Zen is a book that Zen Master Sung San published many years after this was written. He had this kind of Compass of Zen teaching around for many years before the book was published. Okay, so the Compass of Zen says, without thinking, sutra practice, mantra practice, yombo, which is repeating the Buddha's name, practice, and Zen practice are all the same. But if you're attached to thinking and attached to words, all practices are different. When we eat, some people use chopsticks, some people use forks and spoons, some people use fingers. What you use is not important. Did you get a full stomach? Whether you use a mantra or kongans is not important. What matters is how you keep just now mind, moment to moment. If you understand that, you can always keep enough mind. This means that you already have freedom from life and death, and you understand the true way and how to help other people. That is the great vow, not only in this lifetime, but for numberless lifetimes to come, to save other people. You already have the mantra, Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhisvaha. You have very good karma with this mantra, so use this good karma for all beings. Don't check your mind, don't check your feelings, don't check your other people's minds, only go straight. Don't know with your mantra, then no problem. So the important thing here is Zen Master Sung San didn't say, what do you mean you're not doing the mantra I told you to do? What do you mean you don't like it? He said, oh, well, okay, good. You found something that works? Excellent. Do it. And Zen Master Sung San had given him the first mantra too, but then he replaced it with another one. Now, Zen Master Sungsan continues. He says, some people want to climb to the top of a mountain. One person begins to climb to the south side. They all get up. Don't check others' direction. This is no good. Okay, that's what I was saying before, even though I was critical of a particular mantra practice that I don't really like. All arrive at the top, all at the same point. That is the most important. Now, there is one important point about mantra practice you must understand, and this is a very important point about mantra practice, and it's how mantra practice is connected with koan practice. With mantra, getting one mind and samadhi are very easy. So it's important to kind of repeat. With mantra, getting one mind, that is a mind that is, not scattered, right? And samadhi is a mind that is at peace, at ease, not agitated. So a mind that is concentrated and at ease. It's very easy with mantra practice, and that's pretty much true. But you cannot find your true way if you are attached to mantra. Only mantra, that is, if you only do the mantra and you only get one mind and get samadhi, that is not really a direction. This has no direction. So you have to ask, who is doing the mantra? This means having a direction. Having a direction means keeping a question and letting your cognition become clear so that you can receive your correct situation. This is great love, great compassion, and the great bodhisattva way. So only mantra is one mind. But if you keep the great question and mantra, that is clear mind. Only go straight, only don't know is clear like space. There is no subject, no object, no outside, no inside. When you are doing something, you must do it. If you are not thinking, this is correct mantra and correct don't know mind. What does the cat say? What does the dog say? You already understand. So this is just a string of some of Zen Master Sungsan's favorite teaching phrases, and this is all really good teaching right here when he says this. I hope you only go straight, don't know with your mantra, soon become a great bodhisattva, finish the great work of life and death, get enlightenment, and save all people from suffering. Okay, so that's a great exchange, and it's a great teaching from Zen Master Sungsan about how to do mantra practice. Do good, find a mantra that works. And how do you know if a mantra works? Well, if you don't know the mantra is working, then it's probably not working. But at the same time, you don't just say, "Oh, I don't like this mantra." You give it a chance. But in this particular case, this person, Dion, had, he was fortunate to have a very clear relationship with this particular mantra, the Heart Sutra Mantra. But the one thing that Zen Master Sungsan wanted to really emphasize was asking who is doing the mantra. And so this actually is considered koan practice. Who is doing the mantra is a koan. In fact, it's a great koan. It's really the only koan that you need. And it's considered a hwadu koan. Who is doing this mantra practice? So let me see. Do I have anything else? I think I have one more. Oh yeah. Oh, okay. So we're going to end with the Heart Sutra, but we're going to end with the Heart Sutra in Japanese and a kind of a special version of it. This is a great recording of Japanese nuns chanting the Heart Sutra very fast, and it's really cool. And it's I first heard this recording back in the days when people would pass around. Remember mixtapes? When people, for people of a certain age, but before there was MP3, before there was a World Wide Web, there were these things called cassette tapes, and people would hand them around and say, "Oh, listen to this." And that's how I first heard this this recording of these Japanese nuns chanting the Makahanya Haramita Shingyo. But before I get to that, I just want to show one last slide. This is the Heart Sutra as a mantra delivery system. And this is not just a case for the Heart Sutra. This is often the case. The best example of this is the Thousand Hands and Eyes Sutra, which is a delivery system for the Great Dharani, and which includes a bunch of other mantras. But basically, I've kind of broken down. This is actually a schematic diagram from NASA's website, nasa.gov, rocketparts.html. And I've just taken the parts of the Heart Sutra, with the putting the mantra up in the nose cone where the payload goes, just as a humorous exercise. But it's not. If you look at the things that people like Kukai and the Dalai Lama and other people say about the Heart Sutra and the Heart Sutra Mantra, this really is what they're saying, that the Heart Sutra Mantra is, kind of the point. But it's best to do it as part of the Heart Sutra, because it is the best way of delivering it. But now I'm going to, let me see, I have to unshare my screen for just a second while I find this. Oh yeah, stop share. I hope everybody can stay for just, we're going to go a little over. Let me see, where do I have this? Oh, yeah, here it is. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to share my screen and share the sound. This is the recording, but I want to put the, yeah, okay. So I want to put this up while we're, oh yeah. All right, good. All right, so this is Maka Hanya Hara. So when the nuns are chanting, they emphasize Hanya Haramita every time they say it. So these red, every time Hanya Haramita is here in red, this can help. It's kind of hard to keep up, even if you're just trying to read along with the chant. But here it is. Okay, that was twice. They were going to do it one more time. And so then the way that they're doing it is a little unusual because they're only reciting the mantra once, but they're reciting the entire Heart Sutra 3 times. So they still end up reciting the mantra 3 times. And so there's different ways of doing the Heart Sutra as a practice. And one way that I really like is to do it repeatedly. When I do the Heart Sutra multiple times, I always do the mantra 3 times for every time I do the sutra. Anyway, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. We are done with the class on the Great Bright Mantra. Anybody? Well, so I'm done. Anybody have any questions or comments at the end? Anybody have any suggestions for what we should do on the next class on the Heart Sutra? Requests? Okay, I'll think of something. And if you think of something, please let me know. I have some ideas. There's a lot that one can talk about in the Heart Sutra. So thanks everybody for coming. I had a good time. I hope you did too. And practice the Heart Sutra. Bye everybody.
Thank you, Bert.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.